But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
イタリウイスキーあイタリビーロックでネバラロックがしてくれておーノーそれにあのレビーLet's begin. Indeed.
Oh, there we go. I'm here now. Sorry, it was the button. The button. My bad. So, hello everybody. Welcome. There was the mute button on my microphone. The welcome to Honey Badger Radio. This is the Fireside Chat. My name is Brian, and sorry, I'm kind of nervous. So, because I am here with Sydney Watson, and like I was saying before, I'm a big fan. We've been following your work for a while now. You kind of came out of nowhere. It was really cool. And it was at a time, I think, for us where we thought, wow, you know, there are so few people that actually even want to have the conversation around men's issues. And then, you know, you just kind of came out of nowhere. So good to have you with us. And I was basically just saying welcome to HBR, Sydney Watson.
Well, thanks for having me. And I know I agree with you in the sense that I too feel like I came out of nowhere, but I'm happy to be here. It's a really cool environment. So
yeah. So let me ask, why do you do what you do? What made you like want to come out? And I think you were what I remember you from when I first saw you was there was this big hullabaloo in Australia about the men's march, and you were organizing it, and it was the press was all over it. Not always in the nicest way. So, but why did you choose to make that a thing? Why were you involved with that?
it's not really something that I thought out. I wasn't, when I started sort of talking about politics and things, I didn't think, you know what, I'm going to go and start talking about men's issues specifically. It just sort of happened. And I think that a lot of it for me was, and people actually make this comparison all the time between me and another creator called Shoe on Head, who no doubt you know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to watch her videos, and it just sort of happened that I agreed with a lot of what she had to say. I mean, obviously we differ a lot on other points because she is pretty liberal and I'm obviously somewhere on the right.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of feminism and the way that it goes about doing things and a lot of the narratives that are in society, I was like, I hate this. Like, this is awful. So in terms of the men's march that I had, that was in response to basically the narrative going on in Australia, because Australia is very, very, very pro-feminism. It sort of crops up everywhere all the time for absolutely no reason, even when it's not related to the issue that's going down, at least in the context that that the men's march sort of was born out of. A young woman regrettably and horribly was murdered. And so the narrative at the time was basically blaming all men in Australia, calling them rapists and murderers and things, which to me is ridiculous because the vast majority of men that I know, and I dare say that I don't know, are decent people. And so I just thought, this is absurd. You can't basically turn 50% of the population into the universal enemy. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Let's have a march, for men to basically actually promote actual equality, which to me feminism doesn't do.
Yeah, wow, that's very well said. And well, what I was wondering about is that you're Australian but also American. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Melbourne, Australia, but my mum is American. And so apparently, when you are born to at least one American parent, you sort of get automatic citizenship, so to speak. So when I was, I think, one or two, my mum applied to have me be recognized as a US citizen. So that means that I get to have a passport, social security number without actually having to live here. So it's, I mean, obviously I live here now, but at the
Hmm.
time, my brother and I didn't. So we are both citizens for absolutely no good reason other than the fact that our mom is an American citizen.
Yeah, yeah. And how long have you lived in Australia versus America? Have you do you like travel between the two countries or?
Well, growing up, because the majority of my family is actually here in the US, my mom is from a massive Catholic, Irish Catholic household. So she's one of 9 kids, which is crazy to me.
Wow.
So yeah, then there's, I think we've got 34 first cousins, you know, that just from this side. So I went back once when I think I was 10, and that was just for a family reunion. We stayed for, I think, 6 weeks or 2 months or something like that. And then I didn't come back until I was 24. So
Hmm.
it was a really big gap. Or was I 24? Yeah, I was 24. Big gap. And now I've
Yeah.
obviously lived here for nearly a year, which has been really cool. I live in Washington D.C., which is a a bit of a liberal I mean, obviously, I don't know if people know, but I'm, I am right wing. I don't really like liberals too much sometimes. So sorry if anyone watching is a liberal. I'm sure you're lovely.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, we can actually talk a little bit about that later. But what I was, because you just said that feminism in Australia is a very, very large part of its sort of, I guess you could say, socio-political identity.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
what I was wondering about is it, is it even worse in the US? Because I don't, well, it's hard to tell because maybe you haven't been here long enough, but
Mhm.
I know that it's pretty bad basically everywhere. I even spoke to a guy who came to our international conference on men's issues, which we had here in Chicago just
Yeah.
this past summer, and he was from Japan. And he didn't speak very good English. He was very like struggling to get his words out, but he was trying to warn us that in Japan, feminism is extremely powerful there as well. So it's apparently a big problem in most of the developed world.
Mhm.
I'm going to be specific about the developed world because I think in the developing world there are definitely pockets of it, but it's just not something people will latch onto. So I was wondering, like, how what are some examples of how bad it's gotten in Australia?
Well, I guess that so when you compare America and Australia, I think that definitely the US has escaped a lot of the, I guess, extremism. I mean, feminism here can be extreme, but I don't think it has anything on places like Canada and Australia. So,
Really?
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's actually something that I've noticed since I've moved here. Is yeah, you have people who do talk about it. You know, you have people like AOC, for example, who will often make things about women's problems and things like that. And there are politicians who do that and who do call out the sexism that goes on. But definitely in Australia, it's like a major thing, especially for politicians, where they're constantly bringing it up to reinforce their viewpoints or to constantly badger the other side. And they use it as it's basically weaponized, which I mean, I suppose is the way that feminism is used for the most part with these, radicals. But I guess it's the way that we talk about things. It's the fact that almost everything in Australia, it's like you have to reference women. Which, to be clear, I feel like there's this perception that when you're a woman who has issues with the way that feminism operates, you hate women, which to me is absurd because I think why would I be anti women's rights as a woman? I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of counterintuitive. It's just that I don't like that in Australia, and like for example, it's taken to the extreme. So when a young girl is murdered, rather than us saying, you know what's not acceptable, like murder in any capacity, people being attacked is not okay. How do we change this behavior? How do we stamp out violence? But it becomes a gendered issue where it's we need to teach all men not to rape. We need to teach all men not to murder. So
Hmm.
it basically overlooks the female side of things. And yeah, I guess women, offend to a it's a different rate. It's a less frequent rate, but it's different, but they still offend. I mean, it's still significant.
Absolutely. It's significant. It's not something that should be ignored. And yeah, it's definitely a problem. I think that the main thrust of what you're getting at is that feminism is designed to politicize
Yeah.
itself as something that represents women, even though it doesn't. So when
Right.
you criticize it, people will say, "Oh, you're criticizing women," and it
Mhm.
becomes like this shield. And one of the things that I try to it's a shield against any criticism of feminism itself, because essentially it's basically saying any criticism you levy against us, no matter how no matter how much sense it makes, no matter if you're a female when you're doing it, you're leveling it against women as a whole. And it's basically like how they get you to stop talking, which is essentially the only thing they want to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why it works so well with men, because it's basically like if a guy comes forward and says, I hate this element of the feminist movement because I think it's corrosive, and he actually presents a really well-reasoned, awesome argument, the radicals, and even I actually think some normal people will, and when I say normal, I mean the people in the middle, will
Yeah,
say,
sure. The
why do you
normies.
yeah, the normies, they'll say, why do you hate women? And it's just sort of weird that you can't criticize an ideology. It's absurd, actually, when you can't criticize an ideology, because that's what feminism is. It's not a
Hmm.
reflection of every single woman in the world, because like you rightly pointed out, there are women in countries that don't actually have rights. So their voices are constantly getting stomped on. And who's to say that they agree with, or all of us think the same way? Just because we all have, similar anatomy doesn't mean that we all, think in the exact same capacity. So yeah, I mean, that's why
Hmm.
as a woman, it's kind of cool that you can actually call it out, and people can say that you hate yourself, which obviously I don't hate myself, fam, but you actually have the space to do it, because it's really hard to tell a woman that she hates herself as opposed to telling a man that he's a misogynist. It's difficult.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
And no, that's one of the reasons why female voices in the men's movement, and also in just sort of like anti-feminist or anti, I this sort of anti-establishment voices, whether they're coming from a place of traditionalism or libertarianism or just anti-feminism or men's rights or whatever, more
Yep.
women's voices are necessary, sadly, because they do have that weapon against men. And the normies are actually the people that we want to attract. They're the people that we want to change the minds on, or at least like expose them to these ideas, because they may not have like completely bought into feminism, or they don't really think about it all that much, but they just kind of
Right.
go along with this mainstream narrative that feminism's controlled, right? Which is that men have historically oppressed women, and they've only recently gotten any freedoms at all, if any. And that they're just generally seen as the oppressor. Like if you look at pop culture and the mainstream, even if you don't put in any of the feminist stuff, it still puts out that same general narrative, right?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And I think that's why it's pretty dangerous in pop culture and the way that we talk about it in the media and whatnot, because it just reinforces these ideas over and over and over again. And when you can't escape them, naturally you're going to basically start to go, maybe there's some merit to that. The
Yeah.
problem is that it's fine. I don't have an issue with there being ideas that are, being basically permeated. I have no problem with that. My biggest problem is the fact that there's no opposing argument coming forward that also is mainstream. That's
Yeah.
pretty dangerous, because then you have an echo chamber and you have a bunch of ideologues basically screaming at you, saying that if you don't agree with them, then you're whatever, followed by the phobia, or
Hmm.
a misogynist or whatever.
Yeah, you're an istophobe is what they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, no, I just think that that's a really, it's just a really counterintuitive way of going about things for a movement that allegedly is about equality. It's got a really weird way of going about it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
So recently I saw you on, oh, and by the way, guys that are watching, if you're new here, welcome. That glitch I had in the beginning is not normal, no matter what anyone tells you. Well, welcome to the show. And also, if you guys want to send us a super chat, it's appreciated. I will read them at about the halfway mark on the show today. So one thing I saw was you were recently on, well, it was probably recorded way before, but you were on a YouTube channel called Jubilee, and you appeared with, I think it was Blair White and another gentleman who runs like a podcast or something, and you were talking about the Me Too movement. And
Yes.
one of the things that really stood out for me, and we've had Blair White on the show many times back in the day. Like I used to, I think I found Blair when she was a really small channel, like 12,000 subscribers.
Oh,
And
damn.
yeah, and
A lot.
I had her on, and I remember after that she blew up, and but I still, like, we're still on good terms, and I still see her at like public things, and Blair White's great. But um I saw that one thing that really stood out for me when we were watching this Jubilee thing. We were going through the debate. We have like this show that we do called HBR Debate, where we look at debates about gender or whatever, and we kind of like analyze the tactics being used, and we share, you know, maybe some of our own feedback or whatever. And one of the things that you did that I absolutely adored, which I thought was great, was at one point, I know you're thinking, well, when was this? You brought up, because we were talking about the Me Too movement in that debate, and it was all circulating around women's experiences and women's needs and, you know, women as victims and men as perpetrators. And you said, can we please stop talking about women for a second? Because it's not like the Me Too movement should not be a gendered movement, essentially, right? And I just wanted to say, like, why did you think that? Like, it just seemed like no one else was thinking that. But that is that how you kind of think about these issues when you hear about them? Is that you kind of think, well, is this really all about women, or is there something more to it?
Well, I mean, part of that, obviously they took out a bunch of, I mean, we were filming for, I think, 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So they took out a lot of footage. So you have to understand, by that point, I was ready to rip a face off. I was like, these people cannot stick to a linear conversation if it kills them. And that was driving me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, and it's really cute that it's cute that you bring up and think it's cute, because a couple of people called me out for saying that. They're like, she doesn't have the right perspective. And I'm like, well, when I go into these discussions, of course there is an element there where women are victimized, where women are hurt, where women are suffering in that capacity. But by the same token, it's, you know, we do live in a world where there are two sexes. To some, that might be, you know, like a weird concept, but there are two sexes. And so it's plainly absurd to me to assume that one whole gender doesn't experience the same thing as the other gender, because we actually know, and there's, you know, there's not that much research into it, but there's enough to tell us that men are victimized. And, you know, just based on anecdotal experiences, we know that it happens a lot. And I make a lot of videos about talking about, you know, men being victimized, particularly in sexual assault, you know, capacities. And I read these horrible, horrible stories, and my heart aches for these people, these men, but they get absolutely no coverage. So in that instance, I went into it thinking, I know that everyone's going to be talking about women. And actually, weirdly enough, I literally had just flown in from Australia, literally the day before we filmed that. So I was super jet lagged. I was really tired. But before that had happened, before I flew out of Australia, my best friend of about 10 years, who's a great guy, had told me that he was sexually assaulted a couple years ago when he was drunk by a girl. He kept pushing her off. She kept saying, no, I'm like, this is going to happen. And they ended up having sex, but on his end, it wasn't consensual. So that was in the back of my mind going into that discussion. And I thought, come hell or high water, I'm bringing this up. Like, we're going to talk about this, because so many men will be watching that thinking, why is it only ever focused on women when my experiences are basically completely invalidated?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up. I meant to also follow up by asking about your overall experience at Jubilee, because we actually had a guest on named Christoph Petgaz that was part of a different Jubilee discussion, or middle ground, I think they call it. And he is a real men's rights activist, and he was part of a men's rights activists versus feminists, I think. But he was it's on Jubilee. But he was the only MRA on the MRA side. The other two, one was an incel, which we can, that's a whole separate conversation. But he was an incel. He was definitely someone who probably, like, he was red pilled, because I brought him on the show to interview him afterwards. And then there was another guy who I believe is just sort of like a, you know, typical sort of traditional conservative type, which...
Do you mean the one about toxic masculinity? Sorry to interrupt you.
I think it was about, I think it might have been about toxic masculinity.
Yeah, because I'm talking about, one of them is a YouTuber. His name is Zach. He's Asian. He's a great guy.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, because Zach, and I don't know the incel, but I certainly know that Zach isn't, you know, your quote unquote MRA. But the other guy, the guy you're talking about, he was on the money. Yeah. Everything he said, I'm like sitting there like, what a wizard.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, no, that's the one. That's the one. But Christoph, he actually recorded the whole thing. It was like 2.5 hours long or something. But Jubilee, and he brought up points at every single, you know, discussion in his version, which the audio is really bad, but it's worth checking out. And since Jubilee was trying to create something that would generate clicks and interest, and they also, I believe, have a bias as well that sort of influenced their editing choices. I guess I was wondering about what was your overall experience like with that middle ground discussion regarding #MeToo.
I didn't like the way that we were being presented as the anti-Me Too side because, I mean, but naturally I know why they do it. It's that basically they have to have some sort of, binary dichotomy happening where it's, versus,
You need
this
like
versus
an
that.
antagonistic
Yeah.
setup, right? Yeah.
100%. So, look, I got why they did it. I mean, I understand it from like a content making perspective. It irritated me because certainly, we like us on the anti Me Too side were having a conversation about it, and all of us like before we were filming, and all of us were like, we're not anti Me Too. We're anti corrosive, stupid ideologies that hurt people. Which I
Yeah.
mean, ultimately,
Anti
that's
witch hunts and like you're pro
exactly
due process and stuff like that.
100%. So
Hmm.
ultimately, look, I feel like I'm kind of forgiving. I thought they did a fairly decent job. I know that Dave, the other gentleman who was on our side, felt like they cut out a lot of his arguments. But by the same token, and no shade, Dave, love you, but he did a lot of talking. So
Mm.
really, when they're trying to whittle down 2 hours or 2.5 hours worth of talking into 25 minutes, they sort of have to make editorial decisions about what matters and what's the most important argument. And unless they're trying to paint you as an idiot, which I don't really feel like they did that to our side, to be fair, I think all of us came across reasonably well. And also just because we did a lot less talking than the other side, I feel like the pro Me Too people talked so much. But, and one of them in particular, I'm not going to name which one, but I just was like, Lord help us, you need to be quiet, you need to shush. So yeah, no, I think that they did a good job. You are right in the sense that there is a bias. They are obviously a more left wing orientated
Yeah.
channel, which again, I don't have a problem with that as long as they present your arguments as they've been presented. I don't want to be, like cut up and made to look like I said something I didn't say, which they didn't do, thankfully. But also something that really made me laugh, and I think it's going to make you laugh as well, is when they asked us questions, the producer actually said, guys, try not to talk too much from stats and, try not to use too much data, just talk from your feelings, which actually is their whole show's,
Yeah.
that's what they do. It's all about empathy. But I'm like, lady, you're asking us to talk about the Me Too movement, which is predicated on statistics, or at least we like to think it is, and you're telling me I'm not allowed to use them? Are you lost?
Yeah, right. How can you talk even from a position of where you're expressing your feelings on something if you don't have data that is like that has an effect on your feelings towards something? Like if you have factual data and that factual data makes you angry or makes
Yeah.
you sad, it's coming from a place of factual data. You can't just like, yeah, I just kind of feel this way about this thing right now because reasons. Anyway, that it's just
It's just it was one of those things where, I mean, for people who follow my channel or who know me, and have known me for the last 2 years, I love a good statistic, even if it's something that I'm like, look, this isn't really backed up by anyone else, but here's something interesting at least. I
Mhm.
love that sort of stuff, and to be asked to sort of reel that back, I just felt like, you know what? It makes sense if you're asking us to talk about personal experiences, like they did at the end when they asked us who basically had an experience
Had
with
ex
sexual assault.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally cool to talk about that and not have to bring up statistics. But if we're actually having a conversation about how deserving the Me Too movement is of actual, basically its proliferation, is it deserving of how it's sort of, going about things or the way that we're talking about it? I need to
Mhm,
back it up. Otherwise, you
mhm.
sound like an idiot.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that personal experience, this is another thing that I thought was really neat that you opened up about a personal experience that you had. You don't mind if we talk about this a little bit?
Oh no, I mean it's on
Okay.
the internet now, so
Yeah, and then you
go
made a
for it.
video about it too. And one of the things that and again, I think this is fantastic because you know when and I just want to talk for a minute because I know people hate it when I talk on the fireside chat. They just want the guest to talk, and I'm like, well, that's kind of hard. How am I supposed to get them to talk? But when feminists talk about what MRAs or even people who are interested in men's issues advocates, whatever, they often try to frame the MRA position as something that's coming from a place of self-interest. Like MRAs are doing something because they want something. And when I say they want something, I mean and they want something personally. Like, they've said ridiculous things. I don't know if you've ever heard of some of the stuff that we've been accused of believing in, but I remember did you ever see Cassie J's The Red Pill? You ever see it?
Yes. Mhm.
What did you think?
I thought she did actually really well. I thought some of the voices that she had, I could easily see how what they were saying could be misconstrued. Obviously, when you have an intimate understanding or a better understanding of the movement, you get where they're coming from. Do
Hmm.
I think that some of what they said was, could have been framed better? Sure. I think the overall documentary though was awesome because really it was sort of one of the first of its kind. And she's a super sweet person anyway, so it's like,
Hmm.
double whammy. You actually have a decent person making decent content.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Did you get to meet her?
no, I wish. She
Oh.
emailed me because I asked her. I really wanted to set up a screening for it, because they were all being shut down in Australia,
Hmm.
because the feminists were going crazy. And so I emailed her team, or maybe it was actually someone on her team. And actually, don't quote me on that. I think it was someone on her team, but they were super nice to me, and I was like, oh, love
Yeah,
you
Cassie J
guys.
is a sweetheart. I've met her a few times.
Yeah.
Maybe one day, because we might. Well, I don't know about now with what was going on, but we were gonna have a men's conference in Australia this year. I know that you're not in Australia; you're in Washington D.C. But we'll probably work something out. I have to introduce you to Cassie J. You'll absolutely. You guys are very alike to me. I don't know what it is, but you're both really sweet. But
Aw.
what I was gonna say is that feminists often frame what MRAs believe in as from a perspective of self interest, and one example is when the red pill was out. There was this Canadian feminist woman that was on. I think she was an academic. She was on the CBC, which is basically the Canadian news station. I think it's owned by the state there, and
Mhm.
she was saying that what the men's rights movement actually wants, essentially, don't watch the movie because you're just, giving them attention they don't deserve, because ultimately what they want is to be able to have sex with women whenever they want and make that legal. It was something really ridiculous, right? And it was basically this place of self-interest. And sometimes I get that thrown at me as well, where they say, well, what are you hoping to get out of it? And the funny thing is that when I think about my own life, it hasn't actually been impacted by any issue that we consider a men's issue at all. I just think that there's injustice, and it exists, and I've seen stuff happen to my friends that have been through a divorce or child custody, and I thought that the system would be fair to them, and it wasn't, and I didn't understand why. But me personally, I've never been affected by it. And the reason why I said all that to say that in your story about your experience with sexual assault, one of the things that I thought this was super mature, and again, I don't hear this very often from many people, except for some of the other Badgers who've had similar experiences, like Allison, Hannah, and Karen, is that you, despite the fact that you had that experience, clearly the offender was to blame for what happened, you don't blame men. You just blame that individual. And so it doesn't alter your perspective on men as a whole. And so I guess what I'm wondering about is that um do, how did you help let me see. How did you deal with that experience, and also why do you think you didn't allow it to alter your perspective on men as a class or as a group or whatever?
Well, excuse me. It's a good question. So I think that I grew up in a household with a really great dad. My dad is definitely one of my favorite people on planet Earth, and he just was an awesome father. I also have a brother who, we went through a period there where we were like thick as thieves, and then we weren't thick as thieves because I was a bit of a butthead when I was, like early 20s,
Mm,
and we just didn't get on. And now we're really close again, and I just have so much love for the men in my life that it sort of seems really stupid to take a one negative experience or a couple negative experiences. It hasn't just been one, there've been several, but these experiences that are based on the actions of an individual making individual choices and then extrapolating that and applying that to the entirety of men. Obviously, there are ideologies out there that I don't like that are, that do actually subjugate women. I don't dispute that those exist. They don't really exist so much in the West, but they do exist in other countries around the world. I have issue with that. I probably have issue with those particular men or the men who follow those or believe in them. But again, that's not a universal thing. That's a case by case thing. So
mm-hmm.
I think that, after what happened with the sexual assault situation, then I immediately followed that up with a super abusive relationship. And I didn't want to go into detail in the video because I know that it makes other people feel really uncomfortable. Totally understand that. But after, nearly 2 years in a relationship with someone who had absolutely no problem with being physically, emotionally, just generally abusive as a human being, I sort of walked away from that with actual hangups. And I 100% admit to that. I definitely had hangups for a little while there. And there's some things that still crop up to this day that I go, ugh, I'm uncomfortable. Because I don't want to call it PTSD and be a whiner about it, but maybe that's what it is. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. But going forward, I started to realize that there were just so many nice men out there who make up for the experiences of the crap ones. So basically, the reason I made the video that you're talking about, the one where I explained all of this, is because I would always read the comments. I do read the comments, actually, believe it or not. Sorry, I don't know what's happening to my voice today. Excuse me.
Do you have the beer bug? Is it the beer bug?
Okay. I don't think it is. I think I've already had that, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So when I read these comments of, men who are responding, it's men in particular who are responding to my videos, and they're, it gives them a space to basically explain what's happened to them. And they'll say, I don't want to go near women again. I don't want to date Sydney because women are horrible and they do all these things. And I completely understand why they've walked away with that perspective after their wife has dragged them through the mud in a divorce or, custody situation, or they've been sexually assaulted a number of times and no one's listened to them. I understand why they feel like that. But the reason I made that video is to highlight the fact that you don't have to feel like that. You get a choice in the matter. So you can choose to be pissed off at your ex-wife. That's okay. She probably deserves it. But you don't have to be pissed off at me or, other women just because we happen to be women. And we have no control over her actions. I'm sorry for her actions. But, I just feel like if we're actually going to, facilitate some sort of equality-esque scenario between the sexes where we actually feel good about one another, we have to sort of get over that hump of hostility. It's a really long-winded way of me saying stop being mad at people who didn't do anything to you.
Yeah. Try to only blame the person, don't try to find some way, because it's basically the same as, if someone had a bad experience with a black person and then they just, even if it was really terrible and they just go, just blaming like painting with a broad brush after that, right? It's got the same danger around that, right?
Yeah.
So
that's it. Yeah.
But I think that is definitely because I think I've noticed it's very easy for women who, and I guess men could be the same way in some instances, but I've seen very often women that they get burned by a guy or something, or even something really bad, and then they just blame all men. And they carry that like a chip on their shoulder. And the ironic part about it is that as much as MRAs get painted with that same brush, well, it was a girl hurt you and that's why you're, a men's rights activist or whatever. The funny thing is that a lot of that it's all projection, because most of the time feminists are genuinely carrying, like a chip on their shoulder. And I don't mean to say that to dismiss them. Like, I don't want to say, well, that means your arguments mean nothing. I mean, we don't even need to do that. I don't have to get personal to attack the arguments because they are flawed. But I think that it's worth pointing out where the emotion is at in those statements. And that's why, again, I want to give you credit because you're able to and sure, I mean, you like you said, you had hangups. I mean, we're only human, but we deal with that stuff pretty well. So it's good stuff.
That's what it's pretty clear. I know that you know this too, because when you hang around and research the feminist ideology for long enough, and when you sort of find out the main and the key players in the feminist movement, you start to realize that a lot of what they're saying is based on hurt, and it's based on this sense that they've been hard done by, which we don't know what their experiences are in total, but based on what they say and what have you, it's pretty clear that they are hurting. And I know I sound like a hippie, but it's entirely possible to get through that and to get past that. And so I think that when I initially made that video, it was after I had a conversation with a friend of mine who had expressed that he is scared of women, so to speak, because of an experience that he had, and he just doesn't want to deal with them anymore. And it really made me think. I was like, for every man who feels like you, there's a woman on the other side who feels like that too. So all of this is coming from a place of hurt. So let's talk about it.
Exactly.
This doesn't get limelight. It doesn't get any attention. I don't know. I feel like an alien. I'm over here talking about the most random crap ever that people are like, what is this?
Yeah, well, it's you are part of that corner of the internet that we occupy that talks about gender. We actually think that the problem between the genders is the most important problem that we're facing in the West, and if not everywhere. And the reason I think that we have that, well, we do have our reasons for it, but I want to know if you've given it that level of thought, because I know that there's a lot of other kinds of activism that goes on, and other struggles between various factions, whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter or you're talking about various Islamist groups and like the issues with immigration, whatever. But we believe, and we've looked at all of these things, that the central issue is actually the one between men and women. And actually, your story about how you had your father in your life, and that you guys are very close, I think it's actually a big part of the evidence for that. Because in every situation where I've spoken to a woman, and I've had many female guests on this particular series that are well-adjusted and mature, and they seem like good, righteous women, they have all had their fathers. And they've all basically like gotten along with both of their parents, and they've been, very close to them, and they've drawn the values they got from the mother and the father, and they've basically used those to make themselves into whole people. And I think that's partly my case for it. So I was wondering if you had also thought about that.
I think that it's a really big issue. I think that obviously you have two sexes in society. If they're warring with each other, then things aren't going to be great. And especially too because a lot of this does sort of roll over into other areas of life, whether that be the justice system or family life, or even the workplace. There is obviously that flow-on effect. So yes, I would agree that it's a massive issue. Whether it's the primary issue, I don't know. I mean, obviously, like I said at the start, because I am somewhere on the right, there are things that I think are super important, like having our freedoms infringed and things like that. I come from Australia, where I feel like the government just does that all the time.
I agree. Yeah.
It's nuts. And even I'm looking at all the stuff that's happening in relation to the coronavirus right now, and I'm thinking, can we just have like asteroid now, please? Like, what are we doing? So things like that to me obviously bear a lot of weight. So I think that they're equally, if not maybe more important. Like individual liberty to me is everything.
Yeah.
Damn, there's libertarian issues.
No, I'm with all that. I actually hold those values myself, but the reason why I think the gender thing is okay, let me put it this way. Children that come from intact families that have both their mother and their father, and all of the security that the mother and the father bring, as well as the kind of lessons about boundaries and individual freedoms that spill down from that to those children, they're more likely for them to carry those values from their family, i.e. their tribe. Right. And the smallest tribe, the most intact tribe, is the family, right? And so when the family is intact, the children are more well-adjusted, and their values will reflect that. And so you could, in one generation, provided that you could get things, like the course set on that, you could actually have a generation of people that all have their families. I know that this is a little pie in the sky because I'm just using it as an example. But they would all value those things. Like they would value individual freedom. They would value, because they would not feel the need to get those things from the state because they never used it for anything before. And their parents, if they had those, again, if you have a mother and a father in the house together, they're not looking for the government to help them. In general, right? They're going to work it out one way or another. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have like a stay-at-home mom and a working dad, but they may both work. They may own a business together, but they will sustain themselves, and they will focus on, like their little piece of the pie, as it were. And I think that as a result of that, their children will also carry those same values, and they will look for people to be involved with that also carry those same values. So like, it's basically like you break down the family, you break down the community. If you break down the community, then everyone becomes kind of aimless and in need of help and in need of security, and they look to the state for that. And I think that's the reason why the feminist movement has always been about destroying the family, because it wants to create dependency on itself, and by extension the state, especially if the state is feminist, which there are some states, many states, if not most states, that are quite inundated with the feminist dogma, right? It's built into it. Even if they don't say they're feminists. They engage in activities under the assumption that women will always have it worse, that women need special treatment and so on. And that's sort of like been put in place by feminism. So in that one example, I guess that's what I mean by if you can fix the relationship between men and women, the trickle down effect of that, the kind of Reaganomics effect of that, I guess, will be that people will become more liberty minded and they will actually have their values altered because they won't be dependent on the state. And I don't know, I guess, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, yeah, the strength of the family unit. Obviously, I come from a really functional family. Although my parents, I guess, like sort of interacted with normal gender roles in the sense that my dad was running his business, and my mom actually said to me a couple years ago that she's perfectly fine in a support position because she wants my dad to be successful, and like she's fine for that to be the primary. I mean, I guess it's their business to be fair, actually.
Yeah.
She's always like, "Kid, it's all half mine," but
Mhm.
she's right. I mean, like she's been there since the start. So but yeah, I come from that background, and like you said, like I feel like I'm reasonably well adjusted. Man can be, like normal people. I have my flaws, but I feel like we're all well adjusted in my family. But you're right. No, the family unit I think is super important. It is odd to me that there are people out there, particularly feminist voices, who are trying to get rid of that because statistically and like on a data front, we actually know that dads are incredibly important to the lives of their children. They often, they're like a stabilizing factor, and that's really
Absolutely.
important to have.
But that's the reason why they're twisting the narrative. So basically, when you say, and we've said this many times because we're big fathers' rights advocates as well. When we say fathers are absolutely crucial to the development of a child in the same way that a mother would be, it's just that mothers aren't the ones losing their parental rights. So it's the fathers that are. And so when we do that, then that becomes, it's obvious to most people, but what feminists do is they just change the narrative and they say, well, fathers and mothers are interchangeable. There's no difference between the two. They don't bring different value. And they've actually just been going over all of this, avoiding the entire conversation and just doing their top down thing. This is why when Father's Day comes around, if you go to Twitter or you go on social media or you turn on the news and they're talking about Father's Day, what are they doing? Well, they're actually not talking about men at all. They're talking about single mothers as though they're fathers, and they basically say these women are fathers, and this is the reason why they distort the whole discussion on gender, where it can't take place. So they basically say, well, gender is a social construct, and so there is no difference between men and women. The skills they have are interchangeable. The whole thing is just muddy. And if you're thinking about fathers and their importance, well, then you're just going along with this retrograde, patriarchal worldview that men are the head of the household and men are going to just force their women to have babies and cook dinners and make casseroles and all that. And that's, even though the stats don't bear it out, they don't care. They just want to attack the root of it, and that's their tactic.
I don't know why dads get such a hard. I mean, I don't know why people don't push back against that, because I think dads are incredible. Not just me, but lots of other people too think that dads are super important. I know that. I have a great dad. Dads are really important to the development of kids. That's not to say that moms aren't as well. Moms definitely have their part to play. But I mean, when you think about it, I would say that a lot of the issues in society, sort of like you were talking about before, I do agree with you on the front that maybe a lot of the problems that we have could be ameliorated if parents just behaved like parents. And maybe if there was more emphasis on families actually working together and staying together and not getting divorced and whatnot. Obviously, I know that it's having a relationship. I'm not married, but having a relationship is difficult. So I can't say how easy it is being married. But my folks have been married for 36 years. God knows that they've had enough fights, and they are, rock solid. Do they scream at each other on the odd occasion? Yes. Do they work it out 5 minutes later and they're totally fine? Yes. And I don't think that we're putting that much emphasis on having actual healthy dynamics, which is why you end up with people just throwing in the towel. I don't really know what changed between, 50 years ago when people were more likely to stay together and now where people just see relationships as expendable and other people as expendable. Personally, I hate it. I wish that we could actually go back to sort of some equilibrium where, humans actually work together and are decent together. But I mean, it's interesting to just on this topic, because when I was at university, my first degree was in criminology. So I did actually youth justice based stuff. So I know a lot about like youth offending and whatnot, which is super weird. But I liked it at the time. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Joke's on me. But when you look into like the way that kids offend and what leads to a lot of the offending, family breakdown is a huge component. So I always think if we want to actually ameliorate a society that has a lot of children ending up offending, and then the recidivism rates of kids, they're not super high, but it's about 30% depending on the country. When you think about that, I mean, that's pretty grim. If parents just stayed home and stayed together, and we put more emphasis on making that happen and trying harder, I think maybe, society would be considerably more functional. I don't know about the liberty thing, but I think it would be more functional.
Yeah, I think that part of it comes from where I'm getting at with the liberty thing is I noticed that voting patterns in men and women are a little bit different. And that women tend to vote left because they tend to prioritize security over freedom. And men tend to vote right because they tend to value freedom over security, because men believe that if they had the freedom, like if the government was off their backs, they could probably build more and be better providers for their hopeful, wife and children. And because we're evolved to try to become earners and become providers to attract the best mates. Well, the state kind of cuts that off at the knees because there's no entity that can be a larger provider than the state itself, which is why the welfare programs are so big, right? So, and then women vote for more welfare, even if they themselves aren't necessarily benefiting. They see it and they're being told that this is what's best for women and children. So they're happy to pay into public education and healthcare and support for citizens and like in the form of welfare. And ironically, men actually end up paying more into the welfare system.
I know, so yeah. Men pay more taxes so that women can take more in benefits. It's such, and then women vote more so that men can pay more in taxes. It's this circular.
It's absolutely
ridiculous thing.
Yeah,
no
it
one
is.
Those gaps, by the way, like
what was that?
There's gaps that get ignored, huh?
No, yeah, those gaps aren't important. Well, because again, if you point that out, they'll say, well, that's because men earn more because of sexism, which is why they pay more in taxes. So if we gave women equal pay, then they would be paying equal in taxes. But that's just like that gets really Cthulhu-ish like really quick. It's not ultimately a very constructive conversation. But I think that because men pay into the welfare system, women are more likely to vote for the welfare system. That's why you get this divide. But when a woman is in a stable family with a husband, she also begins to care a great deal about how much they pay in taxes because she is a part of that conversation, right? So she actually, a lot of times in households, women manage the finances, like they see where the money gets spent or whatever, especially if they're like stay-at-home moms or something. They end up doing that role. But even if they're themselves earners, if you have like both parents and they're working, they're going to be very concerned with where their taxes go. So they're more likely to be on the, say, like smaller government side, libertarian side. And I think that honestly, you are saying, where did that come from? I think it's a combination of things. I think on the one hand, that we're all the products of public education and the public education system in the States anyway. So I can't speak for other countries. Although the chat, you guys, if you're from other countries, maybe you can let me know what it is for you. But in the United States, public education's goal is to tell you the state is good and that you should be investing in it. And anything that comes out of it is good and also free stuff. And that's basically like the central mantra, though, because and when you go to college, it's funny because colleges get public funding, but they also put you in debt. And while they're putting you in debt, they're telling you that if the state could only pay for that as well. So basically the state is the only entity that can pay for things. And you shouldn't ask for it from, yourself or individuals in your life, but only from the state. And I think that's where you get this rise in these kind of statist leanings from young people, because that's all they know. Plus, so many of them are born in homes without fathers, or at the very least out of wedlock. but I think that most of them don't have their fathers, and so they're going in with an already sort of missing sense of security that's not coming from where it probably should be coming from. And then on top of that, we say, I think we live in a time where there's so much comfort, where we're not like struggling to survive, and we have, you know, internet, and we have cell phones and social media and all of this like leisure time, you know, that more than we've ever had in history. I think that people are more likely to take things for granted, which is why, which is why I think the beer bug has, I think for a lot of people, it's altered their perspective on reality.
Oh yeah. No, what's going to happen when everyone has to leave isolation? They'll be like, "Oh my God, I'm just so happy that buses exist." Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. This is going to be really interesting to see what happens when all this quarantine stuff ends. Because I mean, this is really the first. I mean, I know this is so an aside, but this is really the first. I guess hard times that we collectively have actually had to go through. And actually, when you compare it to some of the other hard times, it's not even really that hard. You know, despite the people dying thing, that's obviously super not good, but you know, for those of us that are healthy, just having to stay home, I mean, it could be worse than, you know, it could be worse. We could be on a beach somewhere being shot at, which I don't want.
Absolutely.
What about you?
But yeah, this is a real challenge for a generation of people that probably never had anything like this. I mean, I know that there's many people who have never experienced this sort of specific thing ever. But I do think that one of the things that I've noticed is while there are still feminists trying to figure out a way that this affects women more, and they're writing articles about it and they're talking about it, it's literally killing men more. And on top of that, I don't think that that's going over very well. I think the general public, and let me know what you think about this, I think the general public of normies is really sick of this woke garbage. I think they genuinely are burned out on wokeness.
Yeah, I think it's really funny. I was talking to a friend of mine last night who, I mean, he's a bit of a normie, if you want to call him that. I mean, even he was saying, he's like, this is just getting absurd. He's like, it's been a really nice vacation though from all the SJW whining, but it hasn't stopped them from trying to make this a gendered issue. I don't know if you saw, and I don't know if the people who are watching saw, there was an Australian senator, I think she was a senator.
Pauline Hanson? No.
I can't remember her name. She's, I think, Middle Eastern or Pakistani or something like that. But she was saying how coronavirus is a gendered issue because it disproportionately affects women in their job roles, and therefore is contributing to the pay gap, blah, blah, blah.
I read that somewhere.
Like, how tone deaf are you? Because men are actually disproportionately dying from this. Another thing that I always think about is, and I don't know the statistics on this, just full disclosure, I don't know what the stats are, but I would say based on logic, the majority of men probably own businesses. The majority of businesses that are being shut down are probably the ones owned by men, so restaurants, gyms, all that sort of stuff. Not saying that women can't own those as well, but I do know, you know, I'm pretty sure that men own most businesses. So
probably,
really you have to question the fact that the people who are actually probably employing people are the ones who are now having to really identify with the fact that they themselves can't put food on the table, but also they're making, you know, the lives of all these other people, their employees, harder, who also can't put food on the table.
And their families,
wouldn't you want to build the men up who are employing people? It's absurd to me. It's like, why is everything always predicated on how it's going to affect women? Yes, we're affected because we're part of society. For 50% of the population, yes, we're going to be affected. But why can't we talk about as well how just people across the board are being affected? And look, the only thing that I'll give them this. I do agree with the fact that you do have people in abusive relationships and domestic violence situations who are now stuck with their abuser. But again, that's happening to both sexes, not just to women. But I'll give them that. I will give them that.
Yeah, that's probably I'm sure that's tough, but I'm also pretty sure that we have ways to get out of it. Like if you are afraid of your partner, especially if you're a woman, you can just call the cops and say, I think he's gonna do something, and the cops will likely show up and just take him away and throw him in a cell for a while. And at least women even have that. I think that when men try to do that, they end up being the ones arrested. So they're like, I will give them that. Yeah, if you're living with a partner that's abusive, you're kind of stuck with them. And that's tough, but I don't think that's a gendered issue. In fact, I think the kind of people that are in most danger, if we wanted to make it a gender issue, are lesbian women.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have it the
Yeah.
worst. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, and I've known some lesbian women, and I don't get it, but they're always getting into really abusive relationships.
Well, they are actually, yeah, I mean, based on like a heap of statistics, again, you probably already know this, but yeah, they are for some reason the most abusive relationships. I think then followed by heterosexual or bi
Yeah,
relationships. And it's actually gay men, believe it or
they
not,
have the
who are the
lowest. Yeah, they're the most
abused,
chill.
which you would think would not be the case if men are the universal abusers, because you have two
It's a
men, which
bit
means twice
strange.
as much abuse, and that's not happening, which
Yep.
I think that's a really, really interesting concept that never ever gets talked about.
Yep. I like bringing up the lesbian and gay relationship thing because it does kind of shatter that whole abusive man narrative because
Yeah.
yeah, it just really, it really does. Again, this doesn't excuse any actual abusive men, but and
No,
it's just when we're looking at statistics, the goal should be not to try to gender issues that are not gendered issues. That's basically all this is about. You know, when we talk about, I don't know if you know this, but like, do you know that most of the sexual abuse of boys in, I think it's in juvenile hall facilities. So like we're
is by
talking underage, it's
yes.
by female guards. Like
Mhm.
most, like overwhelming majority of it. No one ever talks about it. Even like in prisons where there are female guards, they commit most of the sexual assault and rape, you know, of
Well, yeah,
women and men. But most of the time, I think when there are female guards, is they're female inmates.
inmates. Yeah, so usually it's female on female in the adult institutions, which is weird enough. But then I think too, like the problem with those stats and the reason that people I think don't necessarily take into account too often is because obviously in the prison system, men are disproportionately in prison, which means that the majority of guards are men. So I think that's part of it where people go, yeah, but I mean, like, is this based on, you know, have we actually made the numbers so that they're more equal in the sense that we're looking at it based on, you know, how many prisoners there are versus how many sexual assaults and whatnot. So I think like raw numbers wise,
Sure.
actually, no, I'm not, I don't know enough about it to comment, but what you're saying is definitely, you know, there
Yeah.
is data that backs that up. 100%.
Yeah. I wouldn't try to create a narrative that says that, you know, men, you know, like are not a significant part of that number. Like I wouldn't try to, you know, because obviously there are more men in prison, and therefore, that's actually where the real rape culture is too. By the way, in prison,
Yeah.
because it's the only place that we joke about guys getting raped, you know, or people in general being raped, is when
Yeah,
they go
it's
to
like,
prison. And the weird thing is that I don't think that getting raped in prison should be part of the sentence of going to prison. So
right.
why would we treat that like it's, you know, like this side benefit? It's like, no, that probably shouldn't be happening. You know, like
No, definitely. I had never even thought about that before. That's a really good point. Yeah, for people that are so preoccupied with sort of dousing, you know, or throwing water on this, you know, topic of, you know, we shouldn't talk about rape, shouldn't make jokes about rape. It is quite weird that that's the one environment where it's completely fine and everyone just, I guess, universally thinks it's hilarious. And it's
yeah.
actually, I mean, that's it. It's very grim. I never thought about that before. There you go.
All right, I've just
Life
given
shattering.
Sydney Watson a little red pill there.
Oh my goodness. Guess I'm gonna get on Twitter later and be like, say something about it.
do it. But
My notes
but it's about 3:20, so we've gone for about an hour. I wanted to ask you if I can give you some quick fire questions.
Sure.
We'll do it like in Jesse Lee Peterson style. Amazing. And but just some quick fire questions for you, and then we're gonna go into a patron only show. Can you stick around for that? I know that you're really busy and stuff. So all right, great. Well, again,
this week, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm pretty good at managing my time and the things, but this week it's everyone's like, man, I'm like, oh, I cry internally. I'm like, this is awful.
Okay, so let's do some quick fire questions. All right. Number one.
Yes.
Does the Middle East or countries in the Middle East need feminism to solve their problems?
They need equality, yes. But do they need feminism in the sense of third wave feminism? Probably not. Do they need, you know, actual like, do women need to not be subjugated and to have equal representation and equal rights, yes, 100%. Whether or not you want to call that feminism is up to the individual. I feel like it's maybe the easiest way we can talk about it. So, for lack of a better term, yes. But I think that it actually just we need to be elevating women's rights in the Middle East because they don't really have many, which is not that great. So.
All right. Do men have problems in the Middle East?
I don't know enough about it to comment.
Okay.
Maybe. I know that I get a lot of messages from people in India, which I know is not the Middle East, but they're often telling me how feminism has taken a stranglehold, which is a country that I wouldn't actually think would have a lot of problems, issues. But, so I actually don't know enough about the Middle East in that regard to comment, but it's entirely possible. Yeah. But obviously that's a fairly patriarchal, environment.
India?
So oh, no, the Middle East. India,
okay.
That shocks me when people tell me that in India, men's rights are
It's huge.
suffering.
The men's movement is very big in India. Real quick on that, because India carries, I think, at least 3 religions in there. They do have Islam, but they also have Hinduism and Sikhism, and they probably have some other smaller religion, like Christianity's there and stuff too. But we're the major ones though, and all of it though, like the whole culture, the government, etc. It is very. It's got some very, very archaic conservative Indian beliefs, and men are really, really boned in India. And it adds on top of stuff that isn't specifically anti-male, but it's making their problems worse, like the caste system and so on. But yeah, there's a lot of info about Indian MRAs and Indian men's issues. And so I would suggest, if you're interested, you should look into the situation for men in India, because it will, I think it could alter your perception of men's problems in the Middle East as well. I think personally, with the issue with Islam is that it's bad for everybody. And I think that it's bad for everybody. But we often, because we have a tendency to look at the situation for women in any given country, and we would sort of weigh how bad a country is by how bad it treats its women in those countries. The issues that men face in those countries are often overlooked, which is why I asked you about that. I know
that there are things that go down in the Middle East that do affect like boys in particular. I know that there are some really gross cultural practices and whatnot. Yeah. But I mean, I guess it's like one of those things where I'm just reticent to comment if I just don't know enough, and I
understand.
But it is something that I am, now that you've said this, I will 1,000% look into it, because it's something I've never thought about. So there you go.
Yeah, most people don't either. So when you try to find stuff, you always hear about, the burqa and all that. And look, I know that's.
I do have a massive problem with the way that women are treated in Islam, which is horrible. And I mean, it's not even a gendered thing. Like if men were being treated that way, I'd be like, this is not right. But that's why it's really funny to me when feminists are like, you don't care about women's rights. Well, I do.
Yeah, sure.
Environment in which I think that women's rights are kind of suffering a lot. So, yeah.
Okay. So next quick question: do you think that the beer bug is going to have an impact on our perceptions on things like feminism? Do you think that's already having an impact?
I think that based on the way that we've sort of unified as a general rule to sort of fight this, or to sort of combat and also follow like mandates and things from the government, people are a little bit unified at the moment, I would say. I don't know if that's just my perception, that's just how sort of I'm seeing it. I think that the fact that these SJWs and feminists alike are trying to make it still about a particular sex or a particular race, I do think that is going to have a very deleterious effect on the general sentiments from everyday citizens, who will probably see that and be like, really, is now the time? So yeah, in that regard, I think that it might actually be the thing that turns a lot of people off. But by the same token, I don't think it takes one issue to change public perception. I think that you actually have to have a steady and a constant and ongoing conversation about these things for things to actually change. So yeah, maybe in the short term, people might switch off a little bit more, or they might remember, but also too, people forget very quickly how things go. So yes and no. I think in the short term, but long term, probably not so much.
No, it always comes back. It's basically cancer. All you can do is keep giving it chemo until it goes away. But okay. Why is Emma Watson having such a hard time finding a man?
I think her hair is too short now. No shade to anyone with short hair. I'm sure it looks great. No, I don't know. I think she's British. I mean, they're you know how the Brits are. They're sad about lots of things.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't actually know that much about her. We're not related, thankfully. But I don't know enough about her to comment.
Yeah.
I know she's been a bit of an actor in this space, in the whole feminist space, but maybe she just needs a really warm hug. Maybe that might soften her a little.
She's been asking the kink community for help. She's basically like feeling pretty disconnected from men. And I think it's basically because she's fully drank the Kool-Aid. And I don't think she finds men attractive right now. So, yeah.
I have to say this as a very, 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 very straight female. Men are very attractive at least 90% of the time.
Yeah. I'm with that. I mean, I don't find men attractive, but
you're missing out.
No, I'm into women, so. So
can't relate.
You can't? Oh, well, from this end, I think that if you were in my shoes, but you know what? It's okay.
Smell good, and like our hair is soft, and we're like just soft in general. I'm cool with that. But
yeah. And when you guys are clean and you practice hygiene, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But those two steps are very important. So have you seen Taylor Swift's music video, The Man?
I have not. I've actually avoided it because I know that it's going to really, really piss me off. Is that bad? I know that's terrible. I just know that something's going to like set my like blood on fire, and I don't want to deal with it. So I'm like, nah. I'm just. Ugh. Also, too, like a lot of the stuff that she's done and said recently. I watched her documentary thing, her Netflix special.
I heard about that. I haven't seen it though.
And that actually, I mean, like I enjoyed a part of it. I was like, this is interesting, because I used to actually like her music. I'm not ashamed. I'm a little ashamed. But when she started talking about Trump and like a bunch of other stuff, I was like, oh, like no one wants to hear this from you.
Yeah,
no one. Write your damn songs. Play your bloody guitar. Quiet.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really cares about what celebrities think in general. Like especially now, again, they're with the beer bug and all the isolation and stuff, and then you got like celebrities trying to complain about how tough they have it in their mansions. It just doesn't go over very well with regular people. Yeah, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Okay, so let me think here. I just got a super chat from Xeranx for $5. He says, I think you mentioned this before, Brian, but can you talk about your idea of Muslim kamikaze honor fighters being the incels of the Middle East and who fosters it? Yeah, well, that's a long conversation. I'd love to have it with Sydney. Maybe we can talk a little bit on the after show. But basically, we talked about incels, and that was actually gonna be my next quickfire question is, what are your thoughts on incels? Maybe you haven't looked into this much. It's not a men's rights issue at all. No. It's not, but it is an interesting topic of discussion. So what do you know about it? Have you even looked into it much, or?
I feel like I live in this alternate reality where I just avoid sort of these things because I know that these communities exist, but I think the reason I at least have sort of avoided looking too deeply into the whole incel thing is because initially when the term popped up, I was like, this feels derogatory. I don't like it. Which is generally, and that has sort of been my prevailing viewpoint because I thought it was something different, I think, to what it actually is. And now that I'm learning that it's different to what I initially thought it was, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense to me. So I think I actually steer clear a little bit of any environment. I know it's they're involuntarily celibate. That's what incel is. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that I sort of steer clear. This is kind of sound weird, but I kind of steer clear of these environments where I feel like I'm actually going to come across people that are legitimately going to hate on you for being a female, which I feel like is sort of the net effect of those environments. And it's, I mean, I will objectively look at them to research them for a video, or if, just so that I actually have a holistic, rounded view of an issue so that I'm not talking out my butt when I say things. But in terms of engaging with it, I'm like, I'm okay.
Okay. When you come across red pill rage, which I assume that you do, you've probably run into, angry MGTOW or people, or just men who are basically like, I'm never going to trust a woman again. Especially when you see, we do a series on this channel where I look at news and I try to talk about instances of mothers or teachers that have raped their students, or mothers who have murdered their children, and these terrible things that get very little coverage. And the point of it is simply to constantly remind the audience that women are human and that some of them do terrible things. And because we only usually hear about terrible things that men do in the news, that's sort of predominant. So I'm bringing a little bit of balance. And not just that, we like to talk about good things that have happened. It's just that, well, good things don't happen very often. Or at least if good things happen, they don't make the news, to be more accurate. Because the news doesn't usually lead with that stuff. So we do get some black-pilled people, mostly men, in our chat, but I usually just let them vent because I think that's what they need, and I don't take any of it personally. But I was wondering, like, do you deal with that much too, and do you tend to avoid it, or what? How do you deal with it?
Oh God, I get that all the time. I get it so much, and it's so funny. It's so funny. It's terrible because I'm of the same opinion as you, believe it or not. So I've come around to this perspective that, especially on Instagram or on YouTube, I don't really actually get it so much on YouTube. I get it a lot on Twitter. I get it a lot on Instagram, where people will, find a post of mine where, and I joke a lot. Like, I have a dreadfully terrible sense of humor. It's very dark. I try to tone it down, but I definitely have a pretty sick sense of humor. And they get on my posts and they just rail, and not even specifically at me, but just about women. And I don't want to cultivate a space where people feel like it's, I want people to have discussion rather than abuse each other. I don't feel like that's particularly helpful. But what I realize is that they need that environment to rail, because it's pretty clear that they don't feel like anyone's listening. And that, I don't want them to not have that outlet and then go and, do something violent or hurt themselves or something like that. So I'm sort of at this perspective where I'm just like, you know what, if that makes you feel better and you want to use me as the outlet to do it, and you want to call me a hoe and all these other horrible things, go for your life. Because at the end of the day, like, it doesn't actually affect me. Like, I'm not going to go and cry myself to sleep at night, because I think you sort of grow, you have to develop a thick skin. That's sort of, the net effect of being on the internet. It's a pretty crappy part of it, but you sort of have to do it. But I do think I get why they do it. I don't like it, but I get why they do it. But no, I definitely get people who are like, you only say this because you're trying to trick men with your pretty girl face and your soft and why are you posting nice pictures of you in nice dresses, you awful, awful, awful person. And I'm like, I'll just wear a burqa, guys. Like, that's why I wear sweaters in all my videos, because I do not want anyone ever coming at me and being like, she has her boobs out and that's why people are watching. This is covered. There's no. I'm a sexless entity. Do not come at me.
Yeah. It's actually, it is kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, because the ironic thing is that, you did come out of nowhere and your channel is quite large, at least compared to us. I mean, we're still at like maybe getting close to 88,000 subscribers and you're at 370K. And I think the reason is because men, and to an extent women, but I think men especially, to see a woman go on the public square or in a public space or on social media and actually stand up for men is something that most men just could not have conceived of. And a lot of times they bring a tip, because I think there's something about a woman trying to bring attention to a problem that that carries evolutionary weight. So like when a woman, it was the old joke, my wife, I'm married, and when my wife is cold, she doesn't ask me to do anything. She just says, I'm cold. And that tells me what I need. Oh, okay, I gotta close the window. I gotta turn the heat up or something, right? Or she'll ask me, "Aren't you cold?" And I'm like, "No, I'm fine." you know,
And it's like,
but it doesn't.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I get it. And I think there's something about a woman that is trying to draw attention to a problem, whether it's something as small as I'm cold or something as large as, you know, men are being ignored in this society and we need to help them. I think that
yeah.
it carries a tremendous amount of weight. It's basically an example or a display of female power, which definitely exists. Women wield tremendous power in the social sphere. In societies that are, like, say, that value speech, you know, and ideas and all that.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
yeah, I think that that's the reason why, one of the reasons why you're so big. But it's ironic because you do get guys that are like, oh, you know, you're doing this for attention. Or you get
Oh,
feminists that
yeah.
I'm sure that feminists have accused you of being a pick me, or, you know,
Yeah.
using this to tempt men. I think they did this to Lauren Southern. They were like, oh, you're just some desperate, lonely woman that's trying to get, you know, men's approval. And I'm like, Lauren Southern? Look at
She's
this woman.
pretty hot.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
she's
mean,
gorgeous. I mean,
yeah.
but besides that, it seems it is a kind of a double-edged sword that you have to deal with.
Well, yeah, you get crap from both sides. You get angry men that hate you, even though you're trying to help them. Because like this is the thing, and people just don't seem to understand this. There's no benefit to me being a woman on the internet that's pro men's issues, like, or pro like helping facilitate, you know, like better discussions so that we can like fix society. Like, there's no benefit to that. I would
Mhm.
actually probably get much further if I was a feminist spouting feminist viewpoints, because who controls the media? The left. Who controls the narrative? The left. Who doesn't control the narrative? This weirdo right here. So it's like, why would I do this to, why would I deliberately shoot myself in the foot knowing that I could probably get much further ahead? That's never been a thing to me. I do this because I actually care. And I've actually cared since the outset, which is actually like, and this is something that, I mean, I don't know how much people care about this, but obviously I love complaining on the internet. I love making my videos. I care so much about the content. And that's why, you know, that's why I do it. But there's also a huge part of me that is, you know, I have a bunch of plans to actually do stuff out in the real world so that I can actually help people out in the real world. Obviously, it's a money issue. So that's why I'm like, you know, I'm just hoarding and saving at the moment so I can actually put these things that I want to do into play. But I have every intention of doing that. I'm not just here so that I can complain at people and then go, well, go on your merry way. Nothing's going to change. I actually care about, you know,
Yeah.
facilitating that. So I don't know. I get a bit miffed sometimes because I think, come on, guys, like I'm on your side. And obviously from the
Mhm.
feminists too, I would say I get more hate from the anti-female brigade than I do from feminists.
Hmm. They have been
Believe it
more
or
vocal lately.
yeah,
They have been more vocal, although I don't think they're nearly. I don't find them to be that much of of a threat.
no,
And
neither.
then I don't mean that to be dismissive, but I think that, yeah, like loud, angry guys on the internet. You know, I want to help them too. Obviously, I do that. I get hate even myself, but
Yeah,
ultimately they're not really my enemy. They're not to me. I mean,
they're
you know,
hurting.
no, they're exactly, they're just people in pain, and I want to help them. I defend, like, you know, when it comes to men, I defend men no matter what. I've defended male feminists. I defended Harvey Weinstein. I've defended Joe Biden, who was recently accused of stuff. I defended Donald Trump when he was accused of stuff. It doesn't matter where my allegiances lie. I stand in support of due process. When I hear accusations, even if they sound like they could be credible, unless I
Mhm.
know for sure that it's true, I don't just side with stuff. When male feminists get busted or a woman accuses them of stuff, and most of the time it's accusations. I remember years ago when we were doing Gamergate, there were all these male feminists that were kind of anti-Gamergate guys. I don't know if you remember Gamergate or knew anything about it, but
Oh,
um
a little bit.
a little bit. Okay. Well, yeah, there was basically more social justice warriors versus regular consumers stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there were all these male feminists, and they would be, you know, viciously attacking people on social media and writing hit pieces on them. They were journalists and so on. And then they would all get accused by women of being sexist or attempting sexual assault with them, and they get them fired from their job. And this was going on before Me Too was a thing. And I
Mm.
remember how many people were like reveling in it because they didn't like those guys. And to a degree, I understand where that's coming from. But also I was like, yeah, but how true is this? Like, are male feminists being accused of things because they're actually these sneaky guys that are using feminism to get in a woman's pants? Or are they being accused of these things because they're around women that are more likely to accuse them of things because they want stuff? They want to take their job from them. They want to destroy them. They just take pleasure in duping people. And it's hard to know the difference. And so I think that to err on the side of what's true and what do we know is better regardless of, maybe where my politics is at, right?
Sure. And that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, I exist in a pretty political world, so I think that's why it influences a lot of what I have to say. But no, I completely like relate to that viewpoint, and I think it's fair. But I mean, I feel like the way that I tend to deal with the world, or at least the way that I try to, and it's funny because obviously I do talk about a lot of stuff that is gendered, but I just really want to take things on a case by case level. I mean, I would prefer to do that forever, but obviously, like, it's kind of hard to do that. And like I said, I do fully accept the fact that I do make things gendered from time to time, or I guess like maybe you could say that my entire channel is a fairly gendered discussion. But yeah, I wish that we could just take things on a case by case level and actually leave gender out of it completely, but that's not the way of the world. So
there you go. All right, 2 more quick fire questions, then we'll wrap it up. This went a little over, but I had so much fun. I didn't really want to stop. So, okay. So next one is, what is equality?
Oh my God. Did you write these? I make a point of not like saying stuff definitively. I'm actually a little bit like that, where I'm like, I don't want to be definitive just in case like I don't know enough and I'm wrong, and then I have to go back and be like, sorry everyone, I effed up, and I need to.
Yeah, the fear of being wrong on the internet is very true. It's a real thing. It's real. And yeah, as long as like I just tell people, look, that I could be wrong, and then I just say,
you have to caveat, otherwise people are like, they're there with their
I got you, you're wrong, you're stupid, I'm unsubscribed. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. Side note though, I will say this before I answer your question. I was having a little bit of a moan the other day on Twitter about how of my last 17 videos, only 2 are monetized, which breaks my heart. I literally spend hours on this stuff and it kills me. So I was moaning about that, and it was interesting because one of my followers on Twitter was like, it's kind of funny, Sid, because like you probably do more research and whatever than actual MSM journalists. But the fact is that if you're wrong, you're canceled. They can be wrong and nothing happens. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a good point. It's so true. We're toast. We're wrong, we are toast. That's it. Everyone's like, you're an idiot. In answer to your question, what was the question again?
What is equality?
What is equality? To me, it's just equal opportunity. So where, we can both do the same thing, it doesn't mean equal outcomes. So I think that that's something that a lot of people get twisted. Just because we have the ability to apply for the same job, or to both have children, or to whatever the case may be, that to me is equality. Whether we both end up getting the job, that's not, that should really come down to merit. And then, meritocracy takes over. I was actually having this discussion with another creator called Jubilee the other day on his podcast, and we were talking about women in the military. So this is just an example. I've always believed, and I know that heaps of military people out there will disagree with this, because I know there is a very strong sentiment that women should not be in the military, or at least in combat positions. They can be in support roles like logistics, whatever, but not in combat roles. My thing has always been like, if you can do the same thing that a man can do, provided that we're not changing the parameters in order to accommodate women, that to me, again, that's equality. You shouldn't be making provisions just because someone happens to have a vagina. That's absurd. But you also shouldn't be making provisions just because they happen to have a penis. That's ridiculous as well. So gender shouldn't come into it. You should just, across the board, equal opportunity. Outcome, that's down to the individual and based on what they can do. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
I'm so long-winded in the way I say these things.
No. It sounds like it's basically like lines up with the I think it's the Jordan Peterson definition of equality, in terms of like,
I'm fine with that.
where does the left go too far? And I think was his big thing is, I think that equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome is a good point to put that on.
Men
So
and women are different though. Like that's the thing, is that your strengths are, there are strengths that are unique to men, and there are strengths that are unique to women. And I think that in this quest for sameness, we're sort of getting rid of a lot of that. This is such a, like, these questions are so complicated because there's so many elements. It's hard to answer it in just like one concrete really succinct way. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, you got to take into consideration that we are different. How that plays into the whole equality thing, I guess it's just like, don't discriminate based on someone's sex. Discriminate on like their hair color or whatever. That's a much better option.
Yeah, definitely. Disney's already firing all the gingers apparently, so we may as well
I love gingers. I don't know what this.
They're all going to be out of work in the acting world. So
I will take them. I love gingers. Gingers, come to my house. You know what?
Go to Sydney Watson's house. It's in Washington, D.C. If you're
I watched that
ginger.
damn show Outlander, and then now I'm just obsessed with your redheads. That's just Jamie, where art thou?
Yeah.
Accent and red hair.
All right. Okay. Last question for Sydney, and you made me almost forget. No. Favorite YouTubers that also discuss gender and social issues. Name like 2 that you like to watch. Sean Head. Okay.
So she's pretty cool. Obviously, some of the stuff she says makes me want to fling myself in the sea when she talks about other political stuff. But in terms of her gender stuff, she's super funny.
Yeah.
And I think that she's really great. Who's the second one? That's a toughie. That's so hard, because now I'm thinking of my friends and like the people I know personally and the content that I watch that they make, and I'm like, like my friend Slightly Offensive. He does he doesn't actually talk too much about.
I know him. He does these man on the street things, right?
Yes.
You're friends with him. Oh, cool. Yeah.
He's a good mate of mine. He's a great guy. But he talks about this stuff, and I think he's got a real different perspective. We've had some real in-depth, intense conversations. Like he and his wife are quite Christian, and so a lot of their belief about the way that men and women operate is predicated on the Bible and biblical teaching. So it's really interesting because obviously I'm coming at it from a completely different standpoint. But his takes, I think, are interesting enough. You don't have to agree with them, but I think that they're really interesting. So he's probably another one that I would say.
All right.
I just do 2? Isn't it? Then
no, you can do another one. One more, but that's it. We'll go into the after show.
I don't think there. I actually watch a lot of fluff content.
Fluff content on YouTube?
Like fluffy content.
You mean like cats?
Like, just doesn't matter. Like, just, I don't know. There's a channel I like called Primink, and he just makes like 25-minute long videos about like other YouTubers, and I just love it.
Oh,
it's great. It's a holiday.
That's okay. Lindsay, my wife, she likes to watch this one channel called Chubby Emu, and it's basically. Do you know about that? or are you just laughing at Chubby Emu?
I just thought you were saying emu. Is it emu?
Emu? It's emu. Maybe it's emu. It's the bird. Isn't that a bird?
Emu.
Yeah, emu. Okay. Emu. So I say emu because she was saying emu. She's Canadian. Blame the Canadians. But no, Chubby Emu is a YouTube channel where a guy, he's like I believe he's a medical student at Northwestern University here in Chicago, or UIC, actually is UIC. And he basically goes through these very obscure medical cases where someone checks in the emergency room and they're dying of something, and he goes through and explains every step of this process to figure out what he has and how to fix it, or she has. And they're these crazy medical stories. Chubby Emu, should check them out. It's if you want to break from all the woke garbage, and sometimes I do. Chubby Emu is good. So if you guys never heard of it.
He sounds like House. It sounds like House.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Dr. House thing. Yeah, kind of. But these are real cases, like real things that have happened. So
sounds very cool. No, I love the brain break. Sometimes you need it after. I mean, because people always say to me, they're like, Sydney, how do you deal with all the stupid all the time? And I'm like, guys, when it's my downtime, I am watching like some ridiculous like anime show where I can just sit there and Google, or I'm watching fluff like on YouTube.
There you go. Well, then you should watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's my plug. If you like anime shows, it's one of the best. Okay, so we're gonna go into the after show. Thank you so much, Sydney. Did you have fun?
I did. Yes.
Okay.
I did actually. This was
I'm
awesome.
glad that you did. So we're going to go to the patron only show and talk to the patrons for a little while. If you guys want to be a part of that, you have to become a patron. Go to feedthebadger.com. Set up a monthly subscription. $5 gets you into the Discord and you'll be able to watch the show. And then there are levels beyond that. You can even get into a level where you'll be able to come into the Zoom meeting with Sydney and myself right now and talk to us. So please consider doing that. That's at feedthebadger.com. All right, so we're going to wrap the show up here. I want to thank Sydney Watson for coming on and taking the time to talk to me today. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. Thank you for the subscriptions. I got quite a few on today's show. Must be your fans, Sydney. I hope that they enjoy our content, even like a 1/10 of the percentage that they enjoy yours. We just want the men's issues conversation to keep rising. We just want more people to talk about it because, you know, YouTube is suppressing our content. And I don't know if it's affecting you as well, Sydney, but I assume it is. Yeah. So
no, I've noticed like a serious decline in like numbers and what have you. Not again, like not that they matter, but like obviously I care about my community because my community is dope. Just by the way, like coolest people out there, Sydney's community.
I bet it is.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I bet it is. And I'm sure that we have a lot of overlap. So of course I'm inclined to agree. So
they're cool people. They're actually really like a lot of them are way smarter than me. And I read their comments and I'm like, you bastard. How did I not think of that?
All right. Well, you guys heard it. You guys are part of a great community. So yeah, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and I appreciate the subscriptions I got today. Hit the bell for notifications. Let us know what you guys think about this conversation in the comment section if you guys have anything to add. And I think that's it. So we're going to go to the after show now. Thank you again for coming on this episode of the Fireside Chat. And
thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you so much. You're a lot of fun, Sydney, and have a great rest of your day, guys. Goodbye now.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.